Hi, everyone. My name's Emily, and thanks for joining us. It's going to be a full house today. So I'll be co-moderating along with Giulia, as usual, and we have an awesome panel discussion on error handling and conversation repair. So let's do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll get right into it. So Jim, do you want to start?
Yes. Hello, panel, and hello, viewers. My name is Jim Rowe, Jim Robot on LinkedIn. I first discovered chatbots in 2017 when I was working as a sales and marketing manager, and I was hooked. And a year later, I went full time. Over that time, I think I was project managed and delivered about 300 projects. These can be small projects, right up to working with large businesses turning over billions, and very privileged because we get to work in an industry that is evolving so quickly and never gets boring.
Yes, that's for sure. Matt, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Matt Portillo. I am the conversation design lead at Amelia. I work here at Amelia's headquarters in downtown New York City. I've been here for several years now. And I met Emily at a conference last year, and hit it off, and now quickly learning about everybody else here on the panel, and great to be here. Error handling and conversation repair is one of my favorite topics, and frankly, I'm looking forward to what I learned from all of you. So so excited to be included here in a panel of experts, and looking forward to the chat today.
Thanks for being here. Lot, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm a conversation designer for CGI in the Netherlands. I mostly work with chatbots. Maybe that's good to say. I have a different background. I have a background in philosophy and art. Let's not get too deep into that. But that's a wrap up of me. And I've been a conversation for more than a year now. I think 1.5 years now, something like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yaddy?
Hi, I'm Yaddy Arroyo, and I'm a principal BUE designer at Truist Bank. So I focus on like narrow AI, like very specific. Very cool stuff though, because it's on the authenticated side. So we get to do some really cool like retrieval of specific data if we wanted to, right? So that's why I think I'm like you, Matt. I'm like excited to hear what y'all say. I'm just here like to enjoy the ride. So yeah, thank you for letting me like crash the party a little.
Oh, of course. Thank you all for being here. No, it's great to have all of you. So I guess to get the discussion started, first thing I want to talk about is one of the biggest problems in our industry, and I think in UX in general, is standardization of terminology. So even the title of this panel discussion can mean different things to different people. So I'm curious what you all call error handling or conversation repair, or if you use another term, and also what the term means to you. So I guess, Yaddy, you want to start?
Yeah, we actually use repair paths as the terminology we use, just because like sometimes it's not, we get too specific, like system issue and this and that. All of a sudden it gets like, whatever, it gets confusing, and it's just easier to say, hey, it's a repair path, right? We will use with certain devs different terms, right? Because we do need to be able to communicate, but internally amongst ourselves, we kind of use that terminology.
Okay.
Maybe I'll go next. I like the term repair path. When we're kind of thinking about when we're thinking about anything related to usability, I don't like the idea of users committing errors. Like, I think that's a bit of a frame of mind that we should get away from, because users are going to do what they're going to do, and I think we don't want to go down that dangerous sort of like blaming users, or like giving a negative kind of, coloring it in a negative way, user behavior in a negative way. Like, user behavior is going to be what user behavior is, and it's our job to adapt to that. And so I think, obviously there is a thing called a happy path through a conversation, and there's an expected outcome, and we need to kind of get users there as best we can. So I like, this idea of repair path. I also, this was literally years ago now, John Bloom, who was at Google at the time, and Kane Sims did a podcast on VUX World talking about, and John called this idea grounding strategies. And I kind of, and I sort of like that. I think it's a little bit too abstract for me to use in my work with clients, but I like the idea of just kind of like helping the user is just sort of like replanting them where they need to be. And so yeah, that's my thought on it.
I love that. Like framing it from like a negative to a positive. It's just you're helping them get to the right place.
Can I respond to that? Because I think it's interesting, because I interpreted error handling completely in the opposite way. Because when I think of error handling, I think of the bot doing something wrong. It never even occurred to me that the customer could be doing something wrong. Yeah, they can type in something that bot can't handle, but I've always seen that as a problem of the bot and not necessarily of the customer. So that's interesting. I also think that talking in negative ways when it comes to bots is more easy than when it comes to real people. But I also don't use the word error that much. Repair flow, we usually talk in terms of flows. Fallback, you sometimes also barge in, and there's also secrets. Repair handling, we usually have like a quick reply option that's called other or something like that. And like, it's not an official terminology, but when people are talking about a quick reply called other, what is it else than a repair flow? So I guess these are the words we use for it. And this is from the conversation design perspective, because you have all kinds of errors. Like a technical error, I would not call a fallback or something like that. We have loads of names for those kind of errors. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd just say that if I'm speaking to customers that are not, in our world, then I call it problem solving for error handling, because that immediately they know what we're trying to do. Within our world, error handling is perfect. And in terms of kind of repair with customers, it's just fixing the problem. So it's just a fix. And I know within technical realms, fix is like a technical error. But with customers, I find fixing a conversational issue, whatever that issue is, whether it's the way we're interpreting the conversation or the way the user has interpreted the conversation, which can happen more often than not, or it's a technical error. I think, problem solving and fix works really well for customers.
Yeah, I love that. I love the word problem. I think in IT, we often use this euphemism issue. And when I think that it's like, it is okay to have problems. An issue to me is like, something to be discussed, different, comms like strategies, like how do we go about doing this? But like a problem is a problem and it needs to be fixed. And I think that's what's like, we shouldn't shy away from that, because that's really the bread and butter of this job and what makes it so valuable in what we do.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you everyone for sharing your different takes. And I think in a way they all fit within one vision, even though there are different sides of it. But what I'm wondering is, thinking about the very first message that starts in this repair flow or problem, or however you want to call it, what do you think makes for a good error message or a first report to the user in terms of length, content? Should it be dynamic? Should it be personalized? I mean, feel free to take this anywhere you want. Maybe Matthew, do you want to start?
Sure. So let's see. I go back to here at Amelia. We have 7 principles that that we use, that we always come back to, and one of those is efficiency. The principle of efficiency. So yes, shorter is better in theory. However, there's another principle, and sometimes these principles are conflicting with each other, which is what makes it so fun. Another principle is useful, or another way of saying that is helpful. And one thing that one thing that really grinds my gears is when I see I'm going to call it a repair path that isn't helpful. It's confusing. It's difficult to understand. It doesn't give users any extra hints as to like, how do I get past this? Like, what next? Error, please try again. Please enter your response again. What? Like, well, what was wrong with it the first time? So one thing that we do a lot with like an error repair path off of a yes or no question is I didn't understand if that was a yes or a no. Short, but also helpful. And then you can ask the question again. Did you receive that SMS? Do you want to resend the order? Whatever the case might be. And also adaptive too, like whether that is you're repairing the user malfunction, quote unquote, or the bot's technical malfunction. You brought up such a good point earlier, and I meant to acknowledge that, and I didn't. It's adaptive.
So at the bank, we have some so I guess we'll talk generic road mapping, right? Sometimes we have issues and problems we just haven't gotten to yet. So we're aware of them, and there's a roadmap where it's like, yeah, that intent we're working on, but we need more data points, so we're not ready to release it into the wild, but we know about it. So sometimes what we've been doing is we've been having like a 3-step approach, right? Like MVP, and then like super future state, and then the bridge, right? So that's how we handle problems, right? We kind of figure out, because sometimes they're problems we created, right? Systemically, infrastructure wise, we can't address certain things. So we have to kind of compensate for it in the chatbot. Sometimes it's user problems that they pointed out to us that we didn't know we had, which are the awesome ones, because if like the call center hears about it, if the live agents hear about it, then we can now surface that up like through another avenue to fix it from the root cause, right? So it's almost like a 2-way street. So like I almost see like, first of all, it's error handling, repair paths, and problem statements, right? They're all like Rubik's cubes, right? Because they're all interconnected to other areas, and sometimes we can't control it. What I like about it is that, yeah, initially it's like 1-way street where we assume a user takes a path and it takes them down the wrong path. There's a stop, and we have to kind of pivot and show them like a repair way. But then vice versa, it's also a way for us to understand like what bigger friction points there are with the experience, right? So that's where like conversational design and service design kind of collide, right? It's in the repair path. So that's kind of like, and by the way, this is what I discovered as Matt was talking. So like, this is all like stream of consciousness type of connecting the dots, right? So thank you, sir. Like, it's really cool to kind of like put it in action,
Glad I could help.
Jim, did you have any thoughts on this? On what's your ideal error message?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm already learning a lot. From project managing so many different projects, it really does depend on 2 key elements as far as I'm concerned. It's who the user is. So how you acknowledge errors and handle them, it will be very different depending on your audience. So for instance, if you're working on a chatbot that's servicing, in local government, and it's serving a wide range of very different people, highly educated, high income, down to people that effectively are homeless and need, additional support, whatever. But you've got to service vast amounts of needs, and how you handle errors that are initiated by the user, and they can be initiated. You ask for a phone number, they give you a postcode. You ask for an address, they give something that doesn't even resemble address. Those kind of errors, you have to, especially in that kind of environment, you have to handle with some sensitivity. because you're not going to always know what end of the scale that person's from. So for me, I always weigh these things up on the kind of who the audience is going to be. And then, because with some error handling, you can be quite abrupt because people just want things to the point. They don't want apologies and drawn out messages about, we're trying our utmost to train our bot. Oh, yeah. It's boring. It's boring for users. They just come, they want a problem solved, and they want to get on their way. So, no, it's interesting learning other people's approaches. There is no standard way. I like the idea of a standardization of for each individual project, because every project's going to be different.
And that's something that people don't like hearing, at least here at my company and I think maybe in the IT space. Oh, it's going to be different. What they hear is, oh, it's a snowflake and it's going to cost us money and cycles and resources and time and sprints. You're saying we need to do this over and over and over again. And I think for us, it is good to have a little bit of a, kind of a base knowledge, a little bit of library that we can draw on, while at the same time, this sort of like, we will always be, discriminate in kind of putting these in. There's always going to be a little bit of a human in the loop. Like, our judgment is important. And I think that might, that it's going to be real interesting as the LLM giants in the room, in elephant in the corner, whatever the expression is, starts to become more and more of a thing, as if it didn't already in 2023, it will more in 2024. So sorry, just made me think of that.
You are both mostly talking about voice, right? I have this impression, because like when it comes to chatbots, people typing in the wrong postal code is just quite rare. So yeah, these are not like the problems that I come across most when I think about error handling in a bot. It's mostly wrong intent recognition, or intent recognition that is kind of right, but just not right enough. And in these cases, I guess the error handling is very different, because you don't really have an error message or anything. You just have like very fluent ways of correcting the conversation flow. And I guess in the most ideal case, the customer never really felt it was a repair flow, or it was error handling, but just like, you're in a shop, you're standing near the jeans, and the person from the shop comes towards you and says like, oh, do you want to buy jeans? And it's like, no, I actually want to return this sweater I bought here a few weeks ago. Oh, well, let's go to the counter. There's no error. There was a intent recognition, but no problem.
Yeah.
And then it really, really depends, obviously, how far off you are, and yeah, if the bot knows the actual answer to the question. And I think this is also very important, that the bot recognizes whether they can or can't answer the question from the customer. And if it doesn't, it's really on point by like kind of acknowledging that and escalating, I would say. And is that error handling? Maybe not, because you are giving the right answer to the question in a sense. But on the other hand, the bot has no idea what the customer is talking about. So yeah, it's kind of a gray area of error handling.
Amen, sister. No, you actually like you're like bling, light bulb moment. Because I think the key, right, is to not make the error state feel like an error. If you can trick them into being like, oh, here we go, then it's actually that's the best quote I've heard. I'm like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. Because if that's what we can do, it's like tricking a kid when they fall down and you're like, you don't make a big deal. You're like, whatever, like here, like, I feel like that's the same way. Don't make a big deal of it. Just address it, move on.
Yeah, you can even go a little bit further, that you're kind of like a fortune teller. Like, I feel an A. It's like, oh, birds, a B. And I think, yeah, actually the kids example works very well. Actually, not so long ago, my kid hurt his toe badly, and I was like, oh, it's no problem, just go to sleep. And he went to sleep, and the next day I saw like his toe was almost hanging off. So it was like, but it was better for the kids. But with the fortune tellers, yeah, I think that example maybe fits it a little bit more, because when you are a bot, you are kind of trying to foresee whatever the customer wants, right? Because the bot doesn't really understand the customer. You just thinking ahead, what might this customer want? And if fortune tellers can do that, I'm sure a bot can do it pretty well as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to pivot a little bit. We have a couple questions from the chat. So I think I'm going to start with this one first, and then we'll go to the other one. Assuming you're developing a hybrid solution, what are the main challenges in error handling conversation repair with LLMs? Jim, do you want to start this one?
No.
Okay.
No, only because I've been very hands off with LLMs at the moment, because
okay.
There's just so much going on in that world at the moment. I'm just waiting for things to settle down slightly. I've been doing my research, learning, looking what other people are doing, but it's not something I can lead a conversation on yet.
In that case, I'm going to rephrase the question, and I'm going to ask, should you use, I guess, well...
Maybe just generally, what are your thoughts on using
there you go.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Whoever wants to start can go.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but I thought Yaddy was going to say something, and I think you are more of the hybrid expert. No, not.
No. Yeah, we both have something to say. I'd rather hear from you first, though.
Okay. To start off, like I only have theoretical experience with LLMs. I'm like Jim. I'm not the expert on this at all. But obviously, we've been thinking about it and brainstorming about it. And one of the things that I would like to experiment with is in what large language models are really good at is rephrasing the question. And like just when you have like this error message that the bot can't solve the problem, you get something like, I don't know the answer to this question. Let me refer to an employee or something like that. This never really sounds very good for the customer, I think. But just imagine that the bot would include a part of the question, repeat that part of the question. I can't help you with yada, yada, yada. But the employee might. I think that although you are not more useful for the customer, let's also say that, the experience feels way more personalized. I guess the customer would feel more understood than when you were just having this general answer. So I think that could be interesting, although also have to think of all the things that could go wrong. Like, for example, health insurance, and someone decides to ask advice about their itchy crotch, and the bot's like, can't help you with your itchy crotch, but an employee might. So that's like, those are all like, it could be very valuable, it could be very nice, but it could also be very, very scary. But this is something that I was brainstorming about. Also, coming up with new questions, like, which kind of topics it could be, but it's just a little bit too much to all put in quick replies. Well, then you could like have an LLM come up with a nice follow-up question and picking out the most likely topics that it could be about. But I have no idea how to implement this technically or how it would actually, but if I get the chance to work with these LLMs, and I think that will be soon, we'll definitely try this out.
I think that's something we're all struggling with right now, is how do we actually like work with this in a hybrid environment?
Yeah.
And also, well, going back to the other part of the question is how can you tell in a conversation with an LLM that it has started hallucinating? And to, I guess, tie it into conversation repair, like how do we account for potential hallucinations when maybe it's giving an answer?
Well, I will tell you at the bank, our shortcut is we don't deal with Gen AI, right? As a response. typically, I mean, we're still evaluating. I'm not saying we're never going to do it, but we cannot risk hallucinations because they sound accurate. And someone who doesn't know banking is especially vulnerable. Like, imagine being told something because everything's Greek to you. We rely on human judgment. And Matt said something important earlier about like kind of like human oversight. I feel in general, like what repair paths are missing is some sort of like user feedback mechanism, right? And a lot of them, we see the up and down and the star rating. That's fine. That's at least something. But I feel like as a community, we have to have a better way for humans to be able to interact, not just input with prompts, but input with feedback on the machines and their accuracy, right? So OpenAI has like the thumbs down, thumbs up now, but they didn't have it before, right? So they're kind of moving in the right direction. So, I mean, to kind of add on to all the points, at the bank, like that's why we kind of rely on deep learning for the LLMs, because they, in theory, should be learning on their own how to recognize certain things. But as a fallback, what we have is like metrics and analytics on our dashboard to be able to tell the missed utterances. So I would say that it's like a comprehensive data, like science type of overview that you have to have, and not just like the certain types of reports like we have for our metrics in dashboard, right? And not just the deep learning aspect itself, but also from a call center perspective, also from like just a business analytics perspective. The more visibility you have into the numbers, the easier you can tell where the cracks are. And then you can kind of ladder that up to like the whole fortune teller thing, right? Like if you know what's coming down the pike, then you can address, and by the way, that's what we've been having to do, right? We've been having to proactively address things. So guess who's my best friend? Like the customer service people, right? Like I'm like, please tell me what you're getting calls about so that we can have a heads up.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting to hear the perspectives from people who work in the enterprise space, because a lot of our clients here at Amelia are enterprise, and yeah, I mean, they're like hallucinations are a pretty big risk that can, I mean, that can cause all sorts of problems, you know, all the way up to, you know, litigation. And that, you know, talk about a low or a negative return on investment. Like, so yeah, we are like, we are still figuring out what to do here. And I don't have the answer, you know, on, you know, user feedback. You know, how do you know when, well, you know, when it's hallucinating? I think that there's a lot of testing that needs to factor into it. There's you know, prompt engineering, prompt designing, you know, redesigning. I'm, you know, this is where, you know, a conversation designer of 6 years, really like have my ear to the ground, you know, to hear some of the perspectives of people who have been in this space maybe only, you know, 1 year or 2 years, because, you know, at this point, I'm kind of a dinosaur, and I'm listening to people. I mean, like, I know the fundamentals, but like how we really harness this new technology. You know, I'm looking to, you know, some of these newer entrants, you know, either beavers, whatever they are, who are doing this and kind of and pushing the technology and seeing the limits and figuring out ways to manipulate it. I think, you know, that's one of the cool things. I have another friend here in the city who works for another company, and she's, you know, she got a master's degree in musical performance, and then just kind of, you know, career change, and now she's like, so now, congratulations, you're a conversation designer, but no, you're actually a prompt engineer and you're using Python. And I'm kind of like, huh, yeah, I don't really use a whole lot of Python in my work, but hey, like, what are we going to learn from this in terms of seeing like how she approaches some of these problems and some of these you know, identifications, like how to prevent these hallucinations from happening in the first place. I think that design and prompt engineering is going to play a part. And also, like, you know, with these RAG models, or you call them like small language models or whatever, you know, these you know, do-it-yourself GPTs, like, you know, maybe that I want to believe that like limits the potential for for hallucination a little bit, but not a lot. And when you work in the enterprise space, you're looking to mitigate the risk a lot. So yeah, very, very eager to see kind of how we, how some bright minds really start to figure that out. Because that's the simplest question. So thank you for whoever submitted it, but it's the toughest answer.
Also because, in fact, LLMs are always hallucinating. This is the problem. It's not that we only call it hallucinating when they're saying something that doesn't make sense to us. But from the perspective of the large language model, it's all hallucinating. So how do you know? I think the only way to really know is to go and read the logs. And this is I think also I'm also working with banks. Also a reason why we are not generating answers. If it's going to be ever that we're really going to generate a whole message, I guess it's making sure that there's not too much freedom for the LLM to move in, to prevent that it's going to say something that's absolutely nonsense. But it's always hallucinating.
It's almost like we need a fact-checking middle agent that takes information from the LLM and then checks out various sources and then scores it, and then you have effectively, like, if we think it's 80% chance it's accurate, perhaps we'll release that bit of text.
Yeah.
Amen, brother. When you said that, I'm like, of course, that makes so much sense.
Well, a lot like our intent recognition anyway. When you look at the intent and it makes a judgment, however it might be, maybe on a percentage. I know some products work that way. And you have your threshold. It's almost like you need a kind of LLM threshold. You need some quality checking in there. And if sometimes when you look at some of the hallucinations, I know every response is a hallucination, but the ones where that it's blatantly wrong. It's almost like you need an agent to just do a very quick, check for things that are most definitely incorrect. And then make a decision whether to release that message.
So we have 2 questions, or I guess 3 questions. But first one is, can't certain intents pull only from knowledge bases and not from LLMs?
Yep.
And yes, that is true. However, in my experience, even those answers can get muddled up depending on how the content's presented. So I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on that, and I guess how we combat that.
I think that's the reality of our world, right? Like, it's not just that. I mean, there's so many knowledge bases within that because you have to have API services. And the minute you have integrations, right? Like at a bank, like we try to make it simple, but there's so much back end from different systems, from different whatevers. So that's kind of like, that is why you have a good engineer, a good like data APIs engineer, right? Who can like make it seem easy, because that stuff is hard because you do have to play around in both worlds.
Right. And then we have 2 questions from Diana. Can chatbots ask questions to clarify my query if I'm not precise? And also, how and when should the handoff to a real person be handled in cases where the chatbot can't help? For me as a customer, a major frustration has been the time I spend talking to the chatbot, knowing my current need is probably outside its scope.
Conversational design. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, that does happen. I think LLM, I mean, at least in the LLM space. Yeah, and I don't know, Diana, if your question is regarding, LLM-based chatbots or just kind of what we'll call more traditional chatbots. But in either case, yes, they can ask questions to clarify your query if you're not precise. Differences that LLMs sort of, spin that up immediately, and then, but I think in this traditional, what does anybody else feel like that's weird to call something traditional when it's been around for less than a decade? Sorry. Anyway, this traditional approach, what we call natural language understanding, architecture, we have these things called intents that we painstakingly train with lots of data and entities. More traditional chatbots, got it. So yes, so one of the things that that we do here, and this is actually two positions that we have. One is NLU architect, and the other is conversation designer, which is a little bit, that's me and we're very UX focused. But this this person and I, we work very closely together to develop to take a stab at like this long list of things that users might say. And it goes well beyond the scope of processes that we're actually going to train the chatbot on. So, for example, let's use financial services and banking. Maybe this chatbot can only give your balance, right? Or it can give answers to common questions. Where do I find this? Where do I find that? But in terms of like process, drawing on API data, things like that, maybe it's trained to do like two or three things. We're still going to anticipate all the intents that somebody might ask, and we're going to do our best to to do an initial training of those intents. And some of those we might find, say there's like, what's my loan balance versus what's my account balance, like how much money do I owe versus how much money do I have. Those are kind of similar, like what those utterances will look like. So if somebody asks, what's the balance of my loan? Easy enough. That's categorized as loan balance. What's the balance of my account? Easy enough. But what if they say, what's my balance? That's going to be one of our intents, and we're going to connect that intent to a little process that just asks, happy to share your balance with you. Are you talking about your loan or your bank account? And we anticipate that. And so people call that wrapper BPN, people call that disambiguation processes. I'm sure there are a million different names, but that's kind of how we handle it here at Amelia. And is LLM going to turn that on its head? Probably. Buckle up and hold on. Let's find out.
I'm not sure though if an LLM will change that much. I mean, it's still that you have like some topics they're just more difficult to grasp. Also, just normal conversation, by the way, not just chatbots. And other things are just really straightforward, right? So, and Jim was just talking about this threshold that also in Amelia you can just see like how big the chance is that the intent is correct, and if there's like acceptable to hit the intent, but still a fair chance that you're a little bit off. Yeah, why not ask a check question? Really ask a check question, as in Matt's example, to phrase it in such a way it doesn't really feel like a check question, just interested in the person, in the customer's needs. And sometimes if you're really unsure, you can just directly ask, is it about this? Actually I would recommend putting check questions in flows.
I just thought of something else. Sometimes we don't even need to ask the user a question. Sometimes we just draw on back-end data. What if the user has no loan account?
Exactly.
Well, then you're not going. Then it makes no sense to ask. But again, you're kind of like the back-end decisioning and the conversation design needs to be pretty thoughtfully and designed, and it needs to be pretty detailed. Like there's a lot that we need to think through.
And also, if the previous conversation was about their loan account, then you don't need to ask, because they're obviously asking about the balance of the loan account.
Got it.
Did we want to talk about memory? Because that is such a good point, Jim. Like some people some chatbots don't consider memory, or they have like very low memory, so they can only remember one or two turns. But you're absolutely right, Jim. If there's already there in the context, if it already is mentioned, right? There's certain things we can suppose. And to your point, Matt, like if we already have access to, if they've already authenticated and we know it's them,
yes,
right? Like why make them disambiguate even more?
Right.
It's like, just be predictive, man. Just be like, yep, I'm assuming this,
If their last 3 visits have been about their loan balance, then assume that the fourth one is going to be the same. If it's not, they'll say it's not.
Right.
I think all this discussion about how precise you need to be at some points with the design of error handling brings us to another big question around conversation repair, which is documentation. So I was thinking if you could give us any tips maybe about what to include or how to document for repair paths, if you have any.
I'll start. Basically, you know how everybody has either a CMS or some sort of like cloud-based Excel spreadsheet, right? Some sort of spreadsheet, right? So like I would say, let's start off there. Whether you have a CMS or not, similar concept. You have a line item. Some people, what they like doing, it depends on the organization, right? They like having all their repair paths on the same tab so they can see everything, right? And then they just cross-reference between Excel and Excel. So for example, you may have one with just like a tab. I'm calling them tabs just for whatever ease. You have all the repair paths on one tab, and then you have all the intents on the other tab. And then you kind of cross-reference the cells and say, this is a repair path. So that way you have all the copy on one tab, and you can leverage, because that's the thing. A lot of times you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If one generic like fallback can cover like X amount of intents, then you might as well do that instead of writing a custom fallback for each individual intent, right? So that's one way to do it. And I think that's what's worked for a lot of places I worked at, because a lot of times we do leverage, as plus, by the way, design systems, right? We leverage design systems. So it's almost like, yeah, just leverage the same copy, right? If it makes sense. If not, then we could see it and add it to the list and kind of show that Venn diagram of the different types of issues we have to keep an eye on.
So glad you brought up Excel. I was afraid I was going to be the only one who was doing some Excel wizarding when it comes to documentation. I don't think I'm doing a very innovative job when it comes to documenting. I usually make sure that the repair paths are just built in a modular, separate path. So like it's also in the data, you can easily extract it from the rest with a nice name. So you know this repair path belongs to these flows. And you can, sometimes we also put a custom metric in there. Like if someone actually has an open input to barge in, for example, or to tell what their question is actually about, put a custom metric there with a little label, like it's a repair question for this flow. And then you can have a nice tab in your Excel or your dashboard. Just immediately you can see all the comments that are written there. And then still you need to sit down and label the hell out of it. Just like see, like can do something about it, can't do anything about that, and go on like that. And then you have a new job to implement all those new insights. Yeah. Do you have any more innovative ways to document this, Jim and Matt?
No, I think you do exactly what I do.
I do actually. I mean, this isn't so much like a tool to really like measure and use some of the custom metrics like you were talking about. But in terms of sort of like documenting the conversation, we don't really use Excel so much. Funny enough, we use an application called Lucid Charts, which you look over my left shoulder, you can see right now. My colleague is working on something in Lucid Chart as I speak. So that's one option that can help to kind of see a conversation flowed out spatially. We also sometimes use it's a proprietary tool in the Amelia platform called Digital Employee Builder, which is also really, really handy. But that's how we sort of document and memorialize the conversations and the content that we design. We haven't used Excel in a while, although I hear what's being said about, oh, you cross-reference cells and you can create design systems. I think that's great, and maybe it's something that we should be doing more of. We were actually, my colleagues and I were just chatting, but they're like, oh yeah, what Yaddy were talking about, maybe we should be doing some of that. It's like, yeah.
Well,
maybe.
Before you jump on that, it's not like we want to use it. Let me clarify.
Yeah.
Okay.
But no, it's actually more complex than that, because if you can think of an Excel spreadsheet, the way we use it is that one line item, like one row, represents one intent. but it's every single variable for that one intent. It's sample utterances, it's responses, it's links to Miro boards and Figma boards. So like to visualize out the flow, we actually do have to like show it, because when coders are developing it, I mean, this is the funny part. We actually don't use real fonts. We use like that like redacted font. So they don't focus when we show visuals, they don't focus on like the content. They use our Airtable or whatever we use as the repository, right? So they copy and paste directly from there. But
that's
if
like
you use
reverse lorem ipsum text.
Yeah, well, exactly. But like just to keep them focused on like, hey, this is how all the pieces play together, because it is hard. It's hard to understand from an Airtable or like Excel or from like clouds, whatever. It's you have to be a writer to be able to do it, right? And even then, not all writers can do it, right? So I'm still learning how to do it. I'm not naturally talented like that, but that's the one way we've been able to aggregate like massive amounts of data, right? Because we're talking about like hundreds of intents, and now we have like at least 2 to 3 bots that we're dealing with, right? So it's almost like, how do you manage? Like I'm saying, if you can get away without using it, that means you're doing something good. Like basically, like we need to learn from you, because that would be awesome.
I feel like there's a hybrid approach in there some way, where somewhere where we can probably take a little best of, well, you know, so a little bit from column A, a little from column B, and go that
And then
way.
it gets even more complicated with generative AI and LLMs and documenting that. So that's a whole nother probably panel discussion that, that we could probably have. But it's really complicated. And I think it's a problem that we've been trying to solve for a long time. For sure. Yaddy, I know, do you have to drop? Okay, yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much
for being here. Yeah. We'll continue this discussion with everyone else. Thank you.
Hi,
Okay, so I was wondering how granular you think people should get when considering repair paths, or do you do it like turn by turn, or do you do like general and then just plug it in wherever it works?
It depends, right? It really depends. If you have the option to be really to understand you correctly, with granular, you mean like precise, right? Precise,
yeah, like
understandable.
yeah, and how in depth do you get each turn? Like, do you go through each step of the conversation and be like, hey, here are all the things people can say or do, and map that out, or do you do more generic buckets, I guess, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm still seeing like I'm trying to understand your question. I mean, with a generic, you mean like this generic fallback?
Yeah.
Typical. I don't understand what you're saying.
Exactly.
Well, I guess that everyone really tries to avoid sentences like that. This would be really a last resort to say like, I don't understand you. So I guess the more generic ones are instructions how to make sure the user gets value out of the bot. Like, for example, like you give an example of how they should formulate it or something like that. But in the repair flows, I usually design. Usually, you already know a little bit. Like the intent recognition is not that bad that you're completely off. So you already know a little bit. You have all the context from the first utterance. With you have good entities, so you can recognize different kind of words that are used, and you can use all that to make, I would say, a pretty precise repair flow if you have the chance. But I wouldn't ask them many questions, like one question to repair. And if you need like 2 to be really, really sure, I might consider it. But no, because you're already in this repair thing and you get people really pissed off if you're gonna like lead them on. And you're already in repair, so the chance of you getting it right is already a little bit smaller. So one good question, you get one more chance, and otherwise I would escalate. Yeah.
Yeah. The answer I have is a little, not always the one that people want to hear, but it's it's thoughtfully consider each repair path. Again, there might be a library of them that you have and you're pulling them off the shelf. I mean, for me, every time there's a yes, like every single question in any voice bot or chatbot flow that I'm designing, every single question has to have a repair path wherever it exists. And so there might be dozens in a single use case. Now, a lot of those questions might be yes or no questions where I'm using this kind of, standard repair path that I have, which is that mine personally is I didn't understand if that was a yes or no, or I didn't get if that was a yes or a no. Repeat the question. But yeah, each one has, each one should be thoughtfully considered. And I always come back to my principles, right? Like easy, efficient, useful, aka helpful. Like, is it easy? Am I making this easier for the user to understand what is being asked? Am I doing it in the way that's going to require the least amount of time as possible to get back on track? And is whatever I'm saying to the user is helpful to them in terms of helping them understand? If I can do that in one short turn of conversation, great. If I have to think about like, okay, this is what we're going to say on the first time the user fails. This is what we're going to say on the second time the user fails, and rarely go beyond 3. At that point, it's more some sort of remediation, escalation, whatever. But we will kind of think about that, and I instruct my developers like, use a counter. The first time this happens, here's what we're going to do. The second time that this happens, here's what we're going to do. It's usually an escalation. Sometimes it's not. The second time it happens, here's the second message we're going to say. And the third time, escalation, send to other resource, whatever. But that's more of a case-by-case determination that I make as I'm thinking about the use case.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't. I think it's been covered really well.
Cool.
I personally, I would only ask for perhaps clarification twice to try and really understand intent, and I'd never go. I don't think I've ever gone to 3 times, because I always put myself in the position of the customer, and I'm immensely impatient.
Right.
So if the conversation feels good to me, even though perhaps they struggle with the intent, people will forgive not understanding. But if you get the intent wrong, people are very unforgiving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think sometimes we can try too hard to really clarify an intent when we're better off just kind of moving the conversation to the next level.
Right.
Thank you. I just wanted to get to one more question. I think this is going to probably be our last one, seeing the time. That we got from the audience, but they couldn't publish it on the live, so I'm just gonna read it out for you. They were looking to get more clarity around the risks of Gen AI and LLM when referencing specific internal knowledge bases. So what do you see as what's more concerning to you specifically when you're referencing internal knowledge bases and still getting maybe hallucinations or anything else?
I only have theoretical knowledge and some experience in experiments that we've done already. It really depends on the quality of that knowledge base. Not any knowledge base is suitable for LLMs. Like we've tried with normal web pages, for example, which could be considered some kind of knowledge base, and ask them questions, and it sometimes would give the right answer, but a lot of times, too many times, it would just pick out the wrong pieces of information. And it had loads of reasons, like the structure of the text wasn't logical enough for the LLM, but it's also to structure a knowledge base in such a way, to cut it up in such pieces that an LLM has a high certainty of picking out the right piece of information and rephrasing the right piece of information really is an art in itself, and not something you just do. This is This, I think, is the difficult part of making a bot with an LLM. And yes, you want more clarity around those risks. So I don't think this is giving you any more clarity other than that you should get like some really amazing people on designing that knowledge base. And you might get something really awesome then, I guess. Yeah.
That's a good point. There's also some knowledge-based design there that needs to go in before. Jim, did you have any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's only just recently that I've started to experiment with knowledge bases. It was actually from a request from an existing client. They wanted a chatbot that could effectively interrogate their HR policies and procedures. And actually, from the testing I've been doing for the last month, there's not a lot in the way of hallucination. It's more actually around how much information it gives it and in what format. So it may be, it'd be reading some stuff from, say, one of the part of the knowledge base would be like the staff handbook, for instance. And that is presented in a way that's really easy to interrogate. So if a staff member says, I've been here 3 years now, how many days holiday am I allowed a year? That's really easy just to read that knowledge base. But then when it needs to go beyond that or into something that's perhaps held behind that, more policy and procedure based, more in depth, that's when you can see the data get presented in some weird and wonderful ways that it's not the way someone would speak, basically. Rather than it being a hallucination, it's just presented horribly. So it's something I'm exploring at the moment. I think it's going to get very exciting. And some of that is around the prompt engineering, really. Is finding the errors and then teasing them out. But it takes an awful lot of testing. And if you've got a huge knowledge base, that's a lot of work. Yeah.
And I think the length of the response is especially important in error messages. Because if we're doing a quick, did I understand you correctly? And then the message is really long or really, I don't know. Did you have any other thoughts, Matt, that you wanted to add to this?
No, I was actually going to say what you said.
Oh, sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Well, I think I guess we're pretty much at time, so I think we'll end here. I mean, there's a lot more we could go into, but I think this was a really good discussion. So I just want to thank you all for being here, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll be having more panel discussions coming up. So stay tuned.
This was so fun. Thank you so much for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone for
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.